Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, March 30th, 2022. Reports that the Biden administration will end COVID-19 pandemic-related limits on immigrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border and seeking asylum, what's known as Title 42, in less than 2 months. President Biden getting a second COVID-19 booster shot 1 day after it was authorized for those 50 and older, and calling on Congress to pass his $22.5 billion funding request for COVID programs. This as negotiations among lawmakers on whether and how to cut funding elsewhere to pay for it go on. We'll talk about the president's health care spending proposals overall in his fiscal year 2023 budget request with a health care reporter from The Hill. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, the first Republican to announce she will vote to confirm Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson. A committee vote scheduled for Monday, and a full Senate vote could happen by the end of next week. An update from the Wall Street Journal Justice Department reporter on the investigation of Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings. From information gathered from his abandoned laptop computer, we'll hear from her. And Russia continues to attack Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities despite promising to pull back its forces. And President Biden telling the Ukrainian President Zelensky the U.S. will send another $500 million worth of security aid, weapons, to Ukraine. Associated Press writing the Biden administration is expected to end the asylum limits on the U.S.-Mexico border by May 23rd that were put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19, according to people familiar with the matter. The decision, not yet final, would halt use of public health powers to absolve the United States of obligations under American law and international treaty to provide haven to people fleeing persecution. The AP story goes on, ending limitations in May would allow for time to prepare at the border, the people say. Well, today's White House briefing with Communications Director Kate Bedingfield, an AP reporter asked about those preparations.
AP is reporting plans by the administration to end Title 42 by May 23rd. Is the Biden administration prepared to deal with the aftermath of ending Title 42 and the expected influx of migrants?
So first, what I would say is that this is a decision that we have long deferred to CDC. Title 42 is a public health directive. It is not an immigration or migration enforcement measure. So the decision on when to lift Title 42, we defer to the CDC. That being said, of course, we are planning for multiple contingencies, and we have every expectation that when the CDC ultimately decides it's appropriate to lift Title 42, there will be an influx of people to the border. And so we are doing a lot of work to plan for that contingency. I think you saw yesterday the Department of Homeland Security did a briefing walking through some of the planning that they're doing to increase efficiency, to ensure that we have the capacity, to ensure that we are operating in a way that is treating migrants humanely, fairly. So you heard from them yesterday on some of the planning that they're doing more broadly. Now, not specifically tied to Title 42 or an ultimate decision to lift it, but just more broadly to the work that they're doing to continue to build up our migration system and ensure that we are restoring order at the border.
White House Communications Director Kate Bedingfield with reporters in the White House briefing room. It was former President Donald Trump who put in place the Title 42 asylum limits, which were then extended when President Biden was sworn in. Title 42 has been used more than 2 million times by the Biden administration. That means the Department of Homeland Security has thrown out foreign nationals more than 2 million times. Title 42 authority named for a 1944 public health law to prevent communicable diseases. On Capitol Hill, Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, at a news conference with response to the news.
I started addressing DHS to say, what is your plan when Title 42 goes away to replace it or to be able to deal with enforcement? Literally for a year, this administration has had time to be able to look at what is their plan. They're now presenting their plan to us of what they're going to do when they take Title 42 off. Their plan is to move people into the country faster. That's their whole plan. What they have worked on apparently for a year is the way to expedite people crossing the border and moving into the interior at a faster rate. As they talk about mass migration, they talk about how do we actually move people to the interior faster so they don't get clogged up at the border and the images that all of you saw last summer don't occur again at the border with thousands and thousands of people. That is not a plan to help us with illegal immigration, is to actually figure out how to be able to move people across the border faster.
That's Senator James Lankford joining other Senate Republicans at a news conference on immigration and this announcement of Title 42. Homeland Security Department says each day currently about 7,100 migrants are arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border, and they expect for as many as 18,000 a day to show up once the restrictions are lifted. And the immigration court backlog in the U.S., where asylum claims are heard, now more than 1.7 million cases. Now to COVID-19 funding. Biden administration requesting $22.5 billion immediately, but Senate Republicans insisting the money be taken from other accounts, and so far finding an account that can be cut and acceptable to some House Democrats has not been settled. Dr. Weixel, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, testifying before the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis today, questioned about it by Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis, Republican from New York.
What is the administration telling you about, I guess there's a push now to pass a new COVID relief package. And my concern is that there have been billions of dollars in fraud in both the Paycheck Protection Program and the Unemployment Insurance Fund. I understand as part of the chairman's memo regarding this meeting that part of the topic was going to be, programs for economic development. I understand that you're at CDC and not necessarily administering these programs, but have you had any conversations with your colleagues in the administration on how to ensure that this money that was fraudulently taken from the taxpayers is returned to the Treasury? Because I am hesitant to support any type of additional funding if we are not going to have accountability for the up to hundreds of billions, it's estimated, roughly 400 billion is the high estimate, that has been taken fraudulently through the PPP and unemployment insurance program.
Here's what I can tell you, Representative. What I can say is we're in a critical juncture right now where we are low on funds in the federal government in order to not only purchase vaccines, boosters, tests, and therapeutics, but to deliver them and administer them to the American people. We at CDC are deeply concerned about our ability to look at vaccine effectiveness studies that are germane into how we use these, looking at studies of long COVID, post-COVID conditions over the long term. What do these post-COVID conditions mean? And
well, I've run out of time. I just want to simply say that we should find out what happened to that money, because to ask the taxpayers for more when we have hundreds of billions of dollars that was lost is just unconscionable. So let's find that money, because it should have been used for its intended purpose to begin with. Thank you.
Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis, Republican from New York, questioning Dr. Weixel, director of the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, today's virtual hearing by the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis. President Biden also urging Congress to approve the extra money for COVID programs. He spoke at the Eisenhower Executive Office building next to the White House. It was right before he got his second vaccine booster shot, now that the shots have been approved by the FDA and CDC for those 50 and older. President Biden also announcing the rollout of a website, covid.gov, as a one-stop place where people can get COVID tests, vaccines, treatments, and the status on infection rates where they live. Here's President Biden.
Just as we've reached a critical turning point in this fight, Congress has to provide the funding America needs to continue to fight COVID-19. We're already seeing the consequences of congressional inaction. The monoclonal antibody, take monoclonal antibodies, for example. They've helped save lives. This isn't partisan, it's medicine. But Congress hasn't provided enough money to keep purchasing these monoclonal antibodies. We've had to cancel planned orders and cut the supply we're sending to the states. Without more funding, we'll start to run out of them by the end of May. We've also had to scale back our plan to purchase more preventive therapies for Americans who are immunocompromised. Critical tools to protect the most vulnerable among us. Without more funding, we risk running out of the supply by this fall. The same is true of testing. It took months to ramp up our testing capacity. The Omicron, we saw how vital, and with Omicron, we saw how vital it was. And we have enough tests on hand to weather the surge. But without funding, we're not going to be able to sustain the testing capacity beyond the month of June. And if we fail to invest, we leave ourselves vulnerable if another wave of the virus hits. Look, On vaccines, and most important tool in this fight, we're also running a risk. Yesterday, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, authorized the fourth shot for those 50 years and older. We know boosters are critical to providing an additional level of protection. That's why I plan to get my second booster today, right here after I'm done speaking. If you haven't gotten your first booster, please don't wait. Do it today. Those who are 50 and older, as well as those who are immunocompromised, can now get even more protection than they have from the initial first doses. We have enough supply to give booster shots to those newly eligible individuals. But if Congress fails to act, we won't have the supply we need this fall to ensure the shots are available free, easily accessible for all Americans. Even worse, if we need a different vaccine for the future to combat a new variant, we're not going to have enough money to purchase it.
A headline at thehill.com, Biden budget preps for next pandemic. The article written by The Hill's healthcare reporter, Nathaniel Weixel, and he joins us now. Thanks for being with us. The President released his federal budget proposal for fiscal year 2023 this week. What is in there about pandemic preparedness?
Yeah, so the budget that came out, he's asking for just a little under $82 billion over the next 5 years to prep for future pandemics. You know, we're looking at the COVID pandemic. We're in the middle of that right now. But there are going to be more pandemics coming down the line in the future, more viruses, and the U.S. wants to be prepared for it. So they want to boost the U.S. readiness for that, whether it's biological threats or, some sort of global health security situation.
How much of an increase would that be over what the government is spending now on this?
It's a pretty substantial increase. But again, the thing is that what he's asking for, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. But, he's looking ahead to the future, I guess. It's a substantial increase over what there is now. There's not billions of dollars currently advocated for that. But, I guess we'll sort of see if Congress feels the need to fund that as well.
In the budget proposal, what other health care programs would get an increase?
Yeah, so they're looking at $12 billion for the National Institutes of Health. They want to research vaccines and therapies to respond to biological threats. They want to give $28 billion for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to boost surveillance and lab capacity. That also doesn't include the new advanced research projects for health called ARPA-H. And this is a new medical research project, sort of like the defense project, DARPA. They want $5 billion for this one, and that will do research into novel diseases and things like cancer, essentially, to try to increase funding in that.
When we talk about the federal budget and health care, and we're talking now about the discretionary side, and Congress can change the numbers, most of the health care related spending is actually mandatory.
Yeah, so I guess there's like $1 trillion in mandatory funding for HHS. So, that's just sort of funding the projects, like the programs like Medicare, Medicaid. These are not funds that, these are not things like the cancer moonshot or, new projects. These are just funds essentially that sort of keep things running as currently is.
As you were studying the president's budget proposal, anything else strike you in the healthcare field?
One is that they're looking to put money into the cancer moonshot. That's President Biden's I guess it's sort of his pet project that he was started to launch when he was vice president under the Obama administration, and is now bringing it back. And they want to reduce the cancer death rate by 50% over the next 25 years. And they're putting in a slew of investments across different agencies, including FDA, CDC, NIH, just to sort of put investments into studying cancer. And that sort of just shows that where the priority is for Biden. You know, we're talking about mandatory versus discretionary, unclear whether Congress will approve of what, the spending for research into cancer, but it shows that that's something that the administration wants to make a priority.
Nathaniel Weixel is a healthcare reporter with The Hill. Find his stories at thehill.com and follow him on Twitter at Nate Weixel, Weixel. And we'll follow it as the budget process continues this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, Shalanda Young, testifying about President Biden's fiscal year 2023 budget request today before the Senate Budget Committee yesterday, before the House Budget Committee. The total budget request, mandatory and entitlement, is $5.8 trillion. About 3.7 of that is mandatory. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, is the committee chair, asking the director about some of the programs and spending that he favors.
Madam Director, the scientific community is fairly clear. We get distracted by the terrible war, Putin's war in Ukraine. We get distracted by a lot of things, but climate change is real. And what scientists tell us, if we do not act extremely boldly in transforming our energy system in the next few years, the planet we leave future generations becomes increasingly unhealthy and uninhabitable. What does the president have in this budget to deal with climate?
Mr. Chairman, the president would invest over $40 billion to deal with the climate crisis, as he's called it. That includes our commitment to ensure that the poorest countries in the world can also step up and meet these challenges. This is a global problem, and if we don't deal with this domestically and in an international fashion, we will not meet the goals necessary before we reach a point of no return.
The American people are disgusted by the reality that we pay the highest prices in the world by far for prescription drugs. What is the president proposing that we do to lower the cost of prescription drugs in this country?
So the president has been clear. He continues to believe that Congress should send him a legislative package that reduces the cost of prescription drugs, reduces the cost of child care for families, reduces health care costs. And this budget leaves the revenue space in which to do that, including the savings. We don't have to spend anything. We actually save money if we lower the cost of prescription drugs.
During the American Rescue Plan, we did something I think extraordinarily important, and that is extended and expanded the child tax credit for working class parents. That expired in January. The child poverty rate skyrocketed by 41%, bringing us back to one of the highest childhood poverty rates of any major country on earth. What is the president proposing we do to address child poverty in America?
You heard from the president in the State of the Union. He continues to believe that the child tax credit should be extended. You're absolutely right. It brought down the poverty level substantially for children in this country. The president, from his own lips, has recommitted to supporting that effort.
White House Budget Director Shalanda Young, questioned by Senator Bernie Sanders, the Budget Committee Chair, independent from Vermont. Also on the Budget Committee, Senator Mitt Romney, Republican from Utah. He focused his questions on the federal debt of the United States and the projected budget deficits in the president's proposal.
Every single year in your 10-year forecast, you're showing deficits of over $1 trillion a year. I don't know how, when the economy is doing well, we can keep adding $1 trillion a year to the debt without at some point reaching calamity. And so does the administration have a plan to deal with this? Is there some way we can stop these $1 trillion annual deficits and putting us on a road to financial distress?
Senator, we're doing it. $1.3 trillion in deficit reduction this year.
Well, I'm sorry. We passed the Democrats passed a massive COVID bill. COVID was an extraordinary event, and we passed a lot of money to help people through that. Is there any reduction in spending that the administration has proposed, other than COVID spending, in this new budget?
COVID spending costs just as any other spending. And this president, had he not done ARP, many economists, including Moody's, who I sat with 2 days ago, believe we'd be in a double-dip recession.
I'm all in favor of COVID spending. I think ARP and the amount of money that was sent to states when states didn't need it. I mean, I think these numbers just roundabout. California had a $60 billion surplus last year, and ARP sent them $40 billion more. And the waste in that, in ARP, as well as other programs, is unbelievable. But I know my time is up. I make the point that if you look at what you're doing over this budget, you're seeing that all of the increases in mandatory programs, the massive increases in mandatory programs, and if we're ever going to get a handle on our debt, we're going to have to find a way to either increase revenue, which I don't favor, or find a way to adjust our long-term benefits, not for current retirees, but for young people coming along. We got to be able to find a way to balance these programs, or we're going to find ourselves in a heap of trouble.
Senator Mitt Romney, Republican from Utah, questioning OMB Director Shalanda Young at today's Budget Committee hearing on the President's fiscal year 2023 budget proposal. You can find today's hearing and yesterday's hearing, as Shalanda Young testified before the House Budget Committee, archived at our website, cspan.org. Wall Street today, the Dow down 65, NASDAQ down 177, S&P down 29. Government says that the U.S. economy grew in the last quarter of 2021 by 6.9% annual pace, but it is likely to slow in 2022 due to high inflation. And payroll processing company ADP saying the private sector gained 455,000 jobs between February and March, most in the service fields like transportation, business services, financial activities, education, and hospitality. The official U.S. government jobs report for March comes out on Friday. Washington Today continues in a minute.
Book TV, every Sunday on C-SPAN 2, features leading authors discussing their latest nonfiction books. In 2003, Professor Noam Chomsky was the first author on Book TV's In Depth, and since then he's written dozens of books. Live at noon Eastern on In Depth, join our 2-hour conversation with Mr. Chomsky as he rejoins us to talk about capitalism, U.S. foreign policy, and social exchange. Some of his most recent books include Hopes and Prospects, Consequences of Capitalism, and his forthcoming Notes on Resistance. And at 10 p.m. Eastern on Afterwards, Wall Street Journal columnist Jason Riley with his book The Black Boom, in which he argues that some policies during the Trump administration improved the economic lives of African Americans. He's interviewed by Trump administration former acting chair of the Council on Economic Advisors, Thomas Phillipson. Watch Book TV every Sunday on C-SPAN 2 and find a full schedule on your program guide or watch online anytime at booktv.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. Senator Susan Collins of Maine is the first Republican senator to say that she will vote to confirm Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson. An early morning statement from the senator reads, after reviewing Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's extensive record, watching much of her hearing testimony, and meeting with her twice in person, I've concluded that she possesses the experience, qualifications, and integrity to serve as an Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. I will therefore vote to confirm her to this position. Senator Collins later speaking with reporters.
In the end, I decided that she had the qualifications, the experience, and the credentials that we require of a Supreme Court justice and warranted my support.
In your statement, you said that there were some things you agree with her on, some things that you don't. In terms of the clarification you were seeking, what exactly did you ask her to clarify?
We had an in-depth discussion of many of the cases that were brought up at the hearings, and she explained in more detail her careful thoughtful reasoning. I didn't always agree with the results that she came up with, but I had no doubt that she applies a very careful approach to the facts of a case when she is judging.
Why did you decide to come out with your decision today ahead of the vote?
Well, the hearings have been completed, and I said from the start that I wanted to make sure that I listened to the hearings because you never know what issues are going to come up. And indeed, there were issues that were raised. And then yesterday, I had another hour-long one-on-one meeting with her. And at this point, I felt I had all the information that I needed to reach a decision.
Thank you guys so much. Republican leadership ahead of your announcement today?
I informed the Republican leaders this morning, so I did give them a little advance heads up, but not a lot.
Do you expect any of your other Republican colleagues to follow suit, and are you talking to any of them?
I have no idea what my other Republican colleagues will do. I have had discussions with some of them, but obviously that's an individual decision and one that only they can make. So I've not attempted to pressure anybody to come out in the same reach the same decision that I have reached, and you'll just have to ask them where they are. Thank you.
Senator Susan Collins, Republican from Maine, in a Senate office building hallway with reporters. She's one of 3 Republican senators who last year voted to confirm Ketanji Brown Jackson to her current position, federal appeals court judge. The others are Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who have not yet announced how they will vote. And another Republican senator, Mitt Romney of Utah, also is officially and publicly undecided. The Senate Judiciary Committee meets Monday to vote on the Supreme Court nomination, sending it to the full Senate, 10 a.m. Eastern. And then the full Senate will take it up next week and vote to confirm likely by the end of the week, April 8th. All of this you can follow live on the C-SPAN networks. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell accusing Democrats of bullying Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Some Democrats, including the leaders in the House and Senate, say they want Justice Thomas to recuse himself from cases related to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol following the 2020 presidential election, because his wife, Ginny, was apparently involved in trying to overturn the results and named Donald Trump the winner of the election. That's according to text messages between her and then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, which have been obtained by the House committee investigating the attack. Senator McConnell speaking today on the Senate floor.
Washington Democrats are now trying to bully this exemplary judge of 30-plus years out of an entire legal subject or off the court altogether. Far-left House members are talking about dusting off their party's impeachment addiction for a 3rd consecutive year. They're boasting about how they've successfully bullied their senior leadership into impeachment in the past. Make no mistake, this performative outrage is not in earnest. This is a political hit, part of liberals' years-long quest to delegitimize the court, all because our laws and Constitution occasionally inconvenience the Democrats' radical agenda. This isn't new. It's a tired old tactic. In recent years, the far left has issued near constant demands for the late Justice Scalia, Justice Alito, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Barrett to recuse themselves from various issues where the far left feared they might not like a certain ruling, all based on spurious accusations about fake ethical problems or partiality. This new inappropriate pressure campaign is just a continuation of this well-worn pattern. It has no basis in Justice Thomas' decades of impeccable service on the court. The justice and the entire court should feel free to completely ignore all this. Justice Clarence Thomas is a great American, an outstanding justice. He is faithful to the text of our laws and Constitution. His writing is clear. His reasoning is rigorous and transparent. I have total confidence in Justice Thomas' impartiality in every aspect of the work of the court.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor. An analysis story at CNN reads, the Supreme Court is subject to the same statute mandating that all federal judges disqualify themselves from disputes where their impartiality might be reasonably be questioned. The statute also spells out the type of financial conflicts requiring the judges step away from the cases. But whereas a lower court's recusal decisions can be challenged by parties and reviewed by higher courts, no such accountability mechanism exists for the Supreme Court. That from CNN. The U.S. Capitol building reopening to the public for guided tours after 2 years of being closed, mostly due to the coronavirus pandemic restrictions. But the reopening is being done in phases because enhanced security measures following the January 6th attacks are not up to speed. The U.S. Capitol Police Chief Thomas Manger discussing this at a House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing today. The subcommittee ranking Republican Jamie Herrera Butler of Washington State with the questions.
The Capitol has been closed about 2 years now. And a few days ago, Capitol officials unveiled a proposal to reopen the complex. And under the plan, we would still be months away from providing our constituents with full access to their Capitol. And in January, General Walker, and we had this conversation as a committee, or committee members, I believe, cited COVID as kind of the dominant reason, and things looked a little different in January, but the dominant reason the Capitol complex was still closed, while recent reports really talk about the constraints you have in terms of staffing and opening doors and being at the right stations. In either respect, since closing down, the goal of reopening, I think should be another priority. It should be up there with some of these other things we've talked about. How was the decision to implement the phased reopening made, and who gave that direction? And over the last couple of years, given the resources the department has been provided, how has the department been working to address the staffing shortages and security concerns in preparation?
So I will take responsibility. It was my decision to recommend to the leadership of the House that we do a phased reopening because we don't have the staffing to be at all the posts where we were pre-pandemic. One of the reasons is we have more posts now than we had pre-pandemic because of a number of issues. We are staffing posts that didn't exist 2-3 years ago. So that I appreciate the willingness to and the understanding that we can open limited tours for now. But again, you'll see the CVC open in a limited capacity, hopefully by Memorial Day. By the end of the summer, my hope is we can do a little bit more. So as we have the staffing, we want this facility opened as much as anybody. And I regret that we're the choke point, we're the problem. In terms of getting it reopened fully. But I do think everybody's on board that they want to make sure that the safety and security of this campus is what it should be as we reopen. So we have, as I mentioned before, we have multiple training classes in progress. We typically would do 3, 4, 5 a year. We're now doing over 12, and now I think this year we may end up doing 13.
The U.S. Capitol Police Chief Thomas Manger before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on the legislative branch. Questions coming from the ranking Republican on the subcommittee, Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler. In the first phase of the reopening, lawmakers or staff can once a week lead a tour of the U.S. Capitol of up to 15 people. And Thomas Manger referred to the CVC, that's the Capitol Visitors Center. It's the underground center on the front of the Capitol. It has exhibits and a restaurant tentatively scheduled to reopen to a limited number of people by May 30th. Roll Call has a story that Thomas Manger wants a $105.5 million budget increase for fiscal year 2023 to hire more officers for what he describes as a severely understaffed department, an issue that has hampered the force since the January 6th riot and slowed reopening of the campus. Article at the Wall Street Journal this week begins a federal tax investigation into Hunter Biden is gaining momentum as prosecutors gather information from several of his associates about the sources of his foreign income, including from Ukraine, and examine President Biden's son's relationship with a company that handled some of its finances, according to people familiar with the matter. C-SPAN spoke to one of the reporters on that story, Sadie Gurman.
Well, this investigation started at least in 2018, and it is being led by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware. That is where Hunter Biden apparently left his laptop at a computer repair shop in 2019. That office has been investigating for at least 3 years under the leadership of the U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who was actually a Trump appointee, but Attorney General Merrick Garland kept him in place when he took office because of this investigation. He wanted continuity in this investigation and to avoid the appearance of any type of, trying to meddle in the investigation. That's something that's been very important to Merrick Garland throughout this. He is somebody who is trying to avoid putting the Justice Department at the center of the kind of partisan battles that dogged his predecessors. But of course, with this Hunter Biden investigation, it's going to be very hard for him to do that. We know that it's a wide-ranging probe into Hunter Biden's business dealings. On the one hand, it's looking at whether he violated any tax laws. And on the other hand, it's also looking at whether he violated any sort of laws that govern lobbying of foreign governments with his business relationships in places like Ukraine, China, and Kazakhstan.
Foreign Agents Registration Act. How does that play into this?
So that is a federal law that requires anybody who is lobbying on behalf of foreign governments within the United States to register with the Justice Department. This is a law that has been used a number of times in recent years, but these cases are always very challenging. And in this case, it's going to be even more challenging because what prosecutors are finding is that Hunter Biden often used third parties like law firms or consulting firms to do the work for him rather than get his hands involved directly in making things happen in Washington.
Through your reporting, how much is the investigation looking into whether President Biden or then Vice President Biden knew about these business dealings and any role that he might have had?
So Vice President Biden and now President Biden, he's maintained throughout this that he had no conversations with his son about his foreign business dealings. And the investigation up until this point, from what we know, has not led to the White House. It has not led to President Biden. There may be other people under investigation that we don't know about, but at this point, their prosecutors have not found that link.
Other countries that Hunter Biden had business dealings in, what do we know about those?
So our reporting showed that he had some business dealings in Ukraine and China and also Kazakhstan and other places in Europe where he was working with some tycoons in these countries who were using the Biden name to sort of leverage their connections in the United States. And so that would be one area that prosecutors would be looking at as a possible violation of, the Foreign Agents Registration Act that we talked about. But certainly, these tycoons were using Hunter Biden and the Biden family name, to sort of leverage themselves in the United States.
What's the timing of this investigation? When will we know more? Will there be formal charges that we're expecting at some point?
Yeah, so what we know at this point is that the investigation seems to be ongoing. Prosecutors were calling people before the grand jury as recently as February, and they may continue to do so. What we don't know is at what point the investigation stands or whether that means prosecutors will ultimately bring criminal charges. There's a number of factors that they would take into consideration before ultimately deciding whether there's a case. And that is certainly something the Attorney General would want to weigh in on. So it's unclear exactly where things stand, but that's something we'll be watching closely.
Wall Street Journal Justice Department reporter Sadie Gurman on this morning's Washington Journal program on C-SPAN. You can find our full discussion with her archived at cspan.org. From the Washington Post, not a full day after Russia pledged at peace talks to drastically reduce attacks in Kyiv and Chernihiv, Ukrainian officials said there had been no such change, fueling further skepticism over Moscow's claim that it planned to scale back some military operations after nearly 5 weeks of bloodshed. The article at the Post goes on. Meanwhile, a U.S. official described tension between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his military. The official said Putin is being misinformed by advisors about Russia's military performance in Ukraine and the impact of sanctions on the economy because advisors are too afraid to tell him the truth. At today's Pentagon briefing with Press Secretary John Kirby telling reporters that last point is true.
On the reports of Putin not being well advised, I'm going to be careful here not to getting into intelligence, but we would concur with the conclusion that Mr. Putin has not been fully informed by his Ministry of Defense at every turn over the last month. Now, I want to caveat that. We don't have access to every bit of information that he's been given or every conversation that he's had. And I'm going to be very careful here not getting into too much more detail on this. But I've seen these press reports attributed to a U.S. official, and we would concur with the basic finding. But I'm not going to get any more specific than that.
The Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby. President Joe Biden speaking by phone today with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, promising the U.S. will be sending another $500 million in security aid, essentially weapons. That's on top of the $2 billion already pledged for security and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. On Capitol Hill, NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Todd Walters, testifying before the House Armed Services Committee. The committee chair, Adam Smith of Washington State, asking the general how far the U.S. can go to help Ukraine so as not to inflame the situation more than it is, and what type of weapons are most useful.
How would you specify the risk of Russia escalating, and how do you think about that? I know it's something you think about. What's the risk there, and what might we do that could provoke it, and what would it look like?
It depends, and the risk that we have to gauge is the risk that Russia first imposes upon Ukraine. So we have to be smart about imaging our way through Ukraine's military perspective and then taking into account what the allies and partners can contribute. And we're always concerned about the force protection disposition of the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian citizens and obviously the populations on the periphery. But all of that has to come into our cross-check.
Outside of Ukraine is what I'm trying to get at. Is there a risk that if we, get more engaged, that Russia would spread the war, and if so, how would they spread the war and to where?
There's always a risk, and they obviously are capable of utilizing all domains and their whole of government capabilities. So as a military mission planner, I've got to take into account all of those branches and sequels. And obviously, as a NATO commander, I am most concerned about the eastern periphery of Europe as it connects to Russia.
Okay, but we can, in fact, provide a lot of weapons to Ukraine within that manageable risk, and I think we are doing that. What's most important to your mind in terms of what weapons we need to get into Ukraine right now to help them? And I agree with Mr. Rogers. The goal here is to push the Russians out and win the fight. What are the most important weapons the Ukrainians need right now to make that happen?
I can go deeper in a classified session, Chairman, but what I can say is those capabilities that are anti-armor, anti-tank, and surface-to-air missiles are very, very important. They have been effective in the campaign, and I suspect in the near future they will continue to be effective.
General Todd Walter, Commander, U.S. European Command, and NATO Supreme Allied Commander. Conversation with Congressman Adam Smith, chair of the Armed Services Committee. He's a Democrat, referred to Mike Rogers, the ranking Republican on the committee. From Fox News, the British police have issued 20 fines over illegal parties held by Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his staff during coronavirus lockdowns, though the recipients don't yet include Johnson, whose hold on power has been threatened by the illicit gatherings. Johnson's government, writes Fox News, was shaken by public anger over revelations that his staff held bring-your-own-booze office parties, birthday celebrations, and wine time Fridays in 2020 and 2021, while millions in Britain were banned from meeting with friends and family because of the government's COVID-19 restrictions, and thousands of people were fined between £60 and £10,000. It's about $79 to $13,000 by the police for rule-breaking social gatherings. Well, today, the British opposition leader Keir Starmer raising this issue during Prime Minister's question time in the House of Commons in London.
He told the House no rules were broken in Downing Street during lockdown.
The police have now concluded there was widespread criminality. The ministerial code says that ministers who knowingly mislead the House should resign. Why is he still here?
Hang on a minute. He's just changed his position. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I mean, we do at least expect some consistency from this human weather vane. It was only a week or so ago where he was saying that I shouldn't resign. He's got to make what is his position, Mr. Speaker? The Met must the investigators must get on with their job. But in the meantime, they should. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we are going to get on with our job. And what we are focusing on is tackling the cost of living, helping people through the spike in fuel prices, the 9.1 billion that the Chancellor has set out. But also, Mr. Speaker, I've mentioned nuclear power, I've mentioned tackling our energy supplies, which Labour totally failed to deal with. What we're also doing, far more important perhaps even than that, Mr. Speaker, we're tackling illiteracy and innumeracy in our schools. And I think we're investing billions in tutoring, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're focusing on, and I think that's what the people of this country want us to focus on.
Here's Starmer. Look, there are only two possible explanations. Either he's trashing the ministerial code, or he's claiming he was repeatedly lied to by his own advisers and that he didn't know what was going on in his own house and his own office. Come off it. He really does think that it's one rule for him and another rule for everyone else. That he can pass off criminality in his office and ask others to follow the law.
Keir Starmer leads the Labour Party in Britain, the opposition, questioning Prime Minister Boris Johnson, head of the Conservative Party, during Prime Minister's questions today in the House of Commons in London. The Prime Minister later appeared before Parliament's Liaison Committee, and news reports say that he refused to say whether he has received a fine for his involvement in the COVID lockdown-breaking parties, or whether he now believes criminal behavior took place. The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, has said publicly that criminal behavior did take place. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can get more top Washington stories sent right to you each day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Hope you have a good night.